from my research background. And so I'm going to share some of that with you today. I'm also a teacher of managerial accounting and entrepreneurship and behavioral finance. And so I try to create this presentation with two objectives. I want to make sure that I try to give you some information that you didn't have before, also kind of allow us to understand how it may make us feel today. And then I want to hopefully create some dialogue at the end that broadens your mind as to how this can impact you and the context that we can place it in for future generations. So I'll start by just making one simple money statement that I think is important for everybody to realize and to take hold of for us to have this conversation. It's that you've been infected with this negative money mindset. And it's a way of thinking about money that is fundamentally broken. The reason why I say that is because in my experience, what I have seen is that this is a type of money fear and money mindset that is caused by that fear that makes people really blind to any opportunities that are in front of them. This is why you would see people that have good jobs but still make bad financial decisions. We're never in this position where we're able to see everything holistically. And so as a result, you kind of have this money blindness. I'll talk about it specifically from the standpoint of those of us that are the descendants of kind of the enslaved Americans that built this country. One of the things that we don't talk about often enough is the second trauma that everybody went through post-emancipation. So we know about the inherent trauma that's related to slavery, but as emancipation started to go into effect, from 1875 to 1935, we experienced the second realm of what would be trauma for most descendants of the enslaved, which were a series of economic limiting type of activities that made it virtually impossible for individuals of any age to actually earn and thrive. First, we had Special Field Order 15, which if you're familiar with Spike Lee, it's where he gets the concept of 40 acres and a mule from. But this is basically a section of land from coastal Georgia all the way up into North Carolina and South Carolina that had a lot of Black people housed there as a result of confiscating land throughout the Civil War. There were thousands of families, almost 60,000 families were on this land. And as a result, one of the things that we saw was that there was the ability to create your own farms, create your own opportunities. But as a result of this field order, one of the things that happened is all that housing was taken away. So the 60,000 families that had moved in and turned some of their the land that they were on working into their own homes, had those homes taken away and returned to the original owners of that land, and were giving jobs that were paying much less than if they actually continued to own that. So just from the housing in and of itself, it took away a certain portion of the wealth generation that would come from that activity. Second is there was a group called the Freedmen's Bureau, and the Freedmen's Bureau was responsible for trying to make sure anyone was able to get into our financial system. Anyone that was in the country had access and became intertwined into our financial system. And one of the first entities created was a Freedmen's Bank. And the Freedmen's Bank allowed all of those freed slaves to put their savings into bank accounts for the first time. And within 7 years, after gaining all the trust of several branches up and down the East Coast, Freedmen's Bank failed, and all the money that had actually been collected there failed along with it and went away. Tons of people that had saved up their money over time, over a 7-year period, and what would have been 19 different locations up and down the East Coast had lost all their savings without any type of protection. And so at this point, housing was gone and now also savings. We also had to deal with, in the South, earnings restrictions from what were Black codes, which were essentially the prohibition of anyone that was Black from really not having a job. And if you were caught not working, you were pretty much arrested or killed. In that era, you also had a lot of people that were not paid their actual wage just because of the place where they were from. So you had a lot of inequalities in similar type of work that really restricted the earnings, and that was done through the combination of threat of violence or jail, limiting job opportunities. And it happened for a majority of the time that people were just coming out of slavery and trying to establish themselves. And then what a lot of people may not know is one of the real arguments after emancipation was, what would we do for all of the ex-slaves that were above the age of 40 that did not have the opportunity to participate in retirement plannings or have any other types of income generating. And for that, one of the main conversations before the country even had its own network for saving for retirement, which was Social Security in 1935. By 1900, we had started ex-slave pensions, which were charters and acts created by people to actually create pensions for those former slaves that were above the age of 40 that no longer had the opportunity to work. And it was done in a way that allowed it to tier as you got older. And so they gave benefits from 40 to 50, 50 to 60, and 60 to 70. One of the things I should let everybody know is that the way in which wealth was lost for former slaves is categorized here, where at that time in 1900, by simply losing the housing opportunity, that was over $8 million of wealth that was lost to all the families during that time. When we look at the Freedmen Bank, the loss of all the savings, that was $3.7 million in 1900. And when we look at the Black codes, we look at especially the way former enslaved were not able to earn the actual amount of money that they should have been entitled to for doing similar work. That inequality led to $2.9 million of lost wealth. And if we were to look at that number, $15 million of wealth that was lost in 1900 and actually future dated it so that way it looks at today, it would be $485 million. So almost a billion. So $500 million lost wealth over a generation. One of the things I think is important that we should all consider is that one person had it figured out very well, and it's a woman by the name of Cali House, and it's the one that I mentioned that started the ex-slave pensions. She became most successful by not only looking at people from a standpoint of what you do for those that can't work anymore in terms of benefits, but she actually found ways to say, hey, we have to do more. We don't only have to provide a mutual pension for ex-slaves, we have to have relief as well as the ability to provide healthcare, educational support. And she created an organization called the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Organization. In Tennessee, there were several slave pension advocates available, but this became the most successful with over 300,000 members throughout the South, teaching everybody the concept of pensions while at the same time providing healthcare and death benefits for those that needed it right away. It's one of the first times that we saw the combination of looking at the way that we can satisfy someone economically in terms of providing income, but also hearing the needs of a person in terms of their present day needs and providing healthcare and burial benefits, which is where we actually arrive today. When we look at what's going on, is that this is something that is embedded within us, that's existed for generations. I can always trace it back to my great grandfather. So anyone that's born in 1900 to 1935, my great grandfather was born in 1914 on my mother and father's side. My grandfather Julian, as well as my grandfather Haywood on my mom's side. They died in 2009, a couple of months apart, and that's what led me down this path of looking at retirement, because simply by retiring, I had a better relationship with one grandfather than I did with another. The way in which they grew up really allowed me to understand how impactful this decision making, this financial decision making, and how this money mindset was. Being born during the time that Cali House advocated for pensions led to both of my grandfathers seeking out employment in some type of institute that could give them a pension. And so my grandfather Julian ended up moving up north and working for the MTA in New York as a train conductor. My grandfather Haywood moved south and worked at another kind of construction company, laying a lot of the institutional piping for schools and other buildings. Both of them had a pension. My grandfather Haywood worked until he died because he stayed in the South. He was impacted by those black codes in that Jim Crow South. And so he knew if you didn't work, that meant jail or that meant that you died. So he would always tell my brother and I and all of his sons, my uncles at the time, get a job. Never let anybody see you walking around. That was always entrenched in him, and he had that belief until he died. My grandfather Julian, who moved up north and worked in the MTA, he believed that you needed to have a pension just so that you had time to spend with your family. And so his objective was to strictly go find a job and spend time with his family in New York, give them a better opportunity. And as a result of that, by the time I was born in 1975, he was already retired. And I got to spend my entire life with him. And that's a part of my financial DNA as much as anything else. What started for him when he was born in 1914 and became part of the man that he ended up becoming is part of this level of culture. That when we look in organizations, we may see diversity, but diversity is really about numbers, making sure that we have different types. When we look at culture, we look at not only different types of people, but the various types of differences that we have. Everyone sees the identity. Everyone sees the primary aspects of your diversity. We can tell who's old or young. We can tell male, female. We can tell. We could tell if you have no hair or long hair. Those things are pretty much very obvious when you look. But everything else out of primary, secondary, organizational, and cultural diversity, it's necessary for you to have a conversation. It's necessary for you to move this conversation forward. And unless you have an inclusive environment that allows you to talk to an individual, you never know about the secondary, organizational, or cultural aspects of diversity. People also don't realize that our financial health is holistic. There's not just one aspect, there are several aspects, and there's five. Five meaning that 20% of our financial health is product specific, but the other 80% comes from our mindset. So the 20% that is product is economic. That's specifically our products and services. But the other four have to deal with the way we think. There's behavioral, how we act. So because of a lack of financial education throughout our lifetimes, before we actually have to start making financial decisions, how we act may be very different when it comes to our finances because we're not quite sure what to do. It's relational because we don't learn financial aspects or money concepts in school, so we learn it from our family or our friends or from TV. And so what we learn about money can come from people that aren't necessarily good at money, but just close in proximity to us. There's also psychological aspects that start to develop when we don't have the education and context to put some of that information in. So it affects how we think about money, both positive and negative. And then lastly, because we're not using this rational, logical part of our brain, most of our financial decisions are made from emotional responses. And so we react to things that are directed by money, and it impacts a lot of our decision making. Additionally, once we start to look at where we are in terms of our emotions, a lot of times we just don't realize that our money feelings, the ways that we feel about money, normally arrive in the trees of fear or anger. And so we have to really acknowledge that. When I talk to people, they don't necessarily admit that I'm angry about money or I'm fearful about money. But we do use words like I'm nervous or I feel exposed or I'm overwhelmed or I'm worried or it makes me feel worthless or it makes me feel inferior, right? Or sometimes I just feel disrespected or ridiculed, right? I'm just annoyed that I can't have this right now. I'm skeptical that this will ever be any different than it is today. I'm numb to what happens to me financially, because those things just happen so often. I'm very dismissive to anyone that's going to try to help me. And so even though we're not saying I'm angry or I'm fearful, if we look at kind of how our emotions will kind of tail off into different layers, we see that everything that I just described is a conversation that we've probably had, a thought that we've probably had, and they are all on the tree of both fear and anger. And what I try to help people do is we try to at least get to acknowledge that one part, so that way we can start to think about money a little bit differently in the future. So it makes us feel courageous and valued and respected, right? So all of the terms that are associated with being happy, right? Hopeful and inspired, right? It makes us feel accepted. So for some people, you can feel peaceful as a result of it. And so we don't want to say money makes us happy, right? But it allows us to actually feel some of those happy emotions that we would not be able to feel if we were so focused on being fearful or being angry about money. So with that being said, when we talk about financial well-being, it really comes down to an overall money ven, right? You have to address your money past. We need to look at what's happened in the past, both from a personal standpoint and a generational standpoint. And we have to know that that still exists today. And as a result of that, it creates the opportunity for us to continue to hold on to these things for a longer period of time. We have to look at and ensure that our money present is balanced and that it actually includes holistic financial health. So we go through these 5 areas of economic and behavioral, psychological, emotional, and relational, and we understand how each of those impacts our money thoughts and decisions. But then we also have to protect our money future, and we do that by addressing these emotional responses by providing ourselves with financial education. We give ourselves the context and the wherewithal to be able to understand exactly why we're responding the way that we are. And we actually are able to identify the future state that we're looking for. And so it allows us the ability to go into a journey or into a financial plan that's geared towards the feelings that you would like to experience, as opposed to being uncertain or worried about what may happen in the future. And so I wanted to give that type of overview so I have an opportunity to not only talk to Rosalind about the content, but then also answer any questions that may be out there. And then, as always, if you wanted to reach me, you can have my contact information available on some of your platforms by just clicking on the QR code, and that will give both my email and my Twitter handle, so you can find me there. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it back over to have a discussion with Rosalind about the content that was shared today.
This was really important, one, to get to the basics of the why. So much we're making decisions and we're like, why is it that 2 siblings in the same household take a situation and one sibling spend every dime that they get, and then there's another sibling that probably refuses to spend, the penny that they received at the age of 5 and they're 30. So how do you explain kind of those dynamics, especially having that same generation of experiences, but interpreting those differently?
Yeah, and so when it comes to our financial behaviors, especially the things that influence us, we never know exactly what point of time something is going to impact us. We don't learn it in school, so it's not like we have this framework or this baseline that we go through. And so I'll give you an example of me and my brother. Like, I remember a vivid example of like walking to a store, and I was going through one of the phone booths and looking for change in it. And my dad was like, "Don't do that, don't look poor." And I just remember like having this recoil at that moment, like, while I am poor, but I also don't want to look poor. And then he's like, you're not that poor. And so then I remember thinking, there are people poorer than me. Like, how is that possible? And so just my entire context of poverty started to change from that very moment. That stuck with me. And it actually is why I do so much advocacy and why I care about financial literacy, because it wasn't until that moment that I understood that there were different levels of poverty. My brother, when I tell him that story, barely remembers. He remembers like what we went to get, right? He remembers that we went to get a bike for him, but he doesn't remember any part of that conversation. He doesn't remember like me putting my hand in there or anything happening with my dad. So that was an impactful moment for me, shared with my brother, and we just don't realize that it all happened at the exact same time. And so that's how financial moments happen, whether it's how we spend money, how we look at jobs. We don't know what moment influenced us, and that's what makes it different inside of a household. We set up our financial behaviors at different points, and so even within the same household, different things could trigger you that end up becoming your financial behavior or financial habit.
I think that's a really good point. Because oftentimes I'm sure if you have siblings, you relive something and you'll be like, I remember when you stole my doll. And they're like, I didn't do that. I didn't cut her head off. Like those, like, I vividly remember that day. I think that's a good comparison. And I think at this point in time, most people are kind of aware of whether it be generational curses or kind of that generational trauma. But how do you get over that? So if it's that mindset of, we are poor or don't look poor. And so maybe that's why you are constantly looking at how you appear, not necessarily the balance of your bank account, but just don't look poor. Once you figure that out, or once you start to kind of get that awakening, how do you move past that to say, okay, maybe looking or not looking poor isn't as important as actually saving and not being poor? How do you move past that in terms of kind of that blockage and that action?
Yeah, it's a good question because it takes time and people experience it at different times. So as I said, we do a lot of emotional decision making and make a lot of emotional responses. And so we just need time for our brains to develop. That happens probably at around age 25. And I've also seen like at around age 30 or so, we start to look at life. Everybody reaches these inflection points where we have to start to ask ourselves, am I okay with kind of the things that I do, and do I want to change them? So the first part of all of this is just simple awareness. I've told people like, here's what's happening, or this is the history and this is why you're doing it. But it doesn't necessarily sink in until you have that kind of that pivot in your life where you're like, okay, I'm ready to approach this from a rational standpoint, not from an irrational and emotional standpoint where I just lash out and try to tell you that I'm not angry or I tell you that I'm not scared, even though my words are saying all those things. Once you get to that point, then it becomes very crucial that you get the right type of help. I think a lot of people start to say, okay, I want to fix my finances. I'm going to go see a financial advisor or a financial planner. You need to go see a financial counselor, a financial psychologist. You need to probably go through and discuss what that trauma has actually meant to you and what it is doing to your life today. Like that's the first part. Then we move from there into, let me clear up some of this information. Let me become more financially educated. So that way, once I understand what's happened in the past, I'm also able to communicate what I need to do to be able to move forward. And then once those two things happen, right, I've identified my past and I'm ready to communicate the things that I need to do to move forward. The last part's the most important part, which is that you just have to act, right? You have to do and just continue to do and make those changes and actually see it manifest your life into something that's a little bit better. And those small changes that you see, those rewards, will let it stick. And I think it's important that everybody realize that it's a simple process. I can give you the recipe, and it's a really simple process to follow. It's just not easy. It's never easy for us to acknowledge things are in the past, change things about ourselves that may not be ideal, and then try to envision a different part of us in the future and try to go towards that reality. So there's nothing easy about that, right? But it is something that we can communicate very simply, but I don't think we should communicate that it's a very easy process for everybody to go through. It takes time. And for some people, it may take a lifetime, but we try to do it as early as we can.
I think that's a really good point. I know a little while ago we shared just bad financial advice that you were given. And it comes down to that kind of generation after generation after generation. I shared, I remember I was coming out of college and everybody was getting like these bigger cars, like everybody had to get an SUV. And so I mentioned to my mom, I think I want an SUV, but I still have this car note. And my mom said, "Oh, you'll always have a car note." And I'm like, "Oh, well, if that's the case, you go get another car because you always have a car note." And I think there's so many of these money lessons that we've learned, whether it be how long you can wait to pay a bill, how long it takes until they cut the electricity off. You know, you can go a few cycles, don't worry about that. And so we have some of these things that impedes our ability to get to that actual level of success. And like you said, you go talk to a financial planner, but they're not going to, tell you to skip X number of, water bill payments so you can go on vacation,
Exactly.
those kind of things. But also when you talk about products. And so right now, so many institutions are leaning on, oh, we're, all about diversity and so forth. When you examine products and services to find out if something is actually acceptable or catered to your individual needs and taking into account your culture, what are some things that people should be looking at? I know we hear things in the news. We're like, okay, that person, whatever happened at that financial institution, whatever happened at that financial institution. But how do we identify a place that aligns with our values and then actually values us?
Yeah, so I mean, another good question. And I think it really comes down to being able to speak in your own financial voice and then understanding what your goals are in the future. The thing I would want everybody to know is that the majority of products that you need for your own financial success, you don't need an advisor or anybody to sell it to you. It's there and it's available. It really is just about, how do we actually come to the realization that we need this type of product. And then we go and we Google it and then we find out enough information and then we feel comfortable with it. You have to look at companies, organizations that are able to tell stories and really want to talk to you. Financial decisions are visceral. We make them with our hearts, not very often with our mind. We make them with emotions. And so, as a person that's talked and engaged with others, you need to sit down and work people through that. And so, organizations that want to give you something, give you a sheet or tell you that this is what normal people do and this is the process to go to, that's not a very culturally proficient way of looking at it. It really is more valuable if the messaging is, I don't know what's appropriate until I have a conversation with you. I don't know what's appropriate until we talk about your goals. I don't know kind of how we can arrive at some of these, milestones that you're talking about until I understand why those milestones are important to you and how you're getting there. And so communication is going to be a number one priority because it has to be a conduit between this is what you're looking for and then this is what I think I heard and here's how I'm going to be able to provide it. So that's going to be one side of it. The other part is that you have to talk to people that cannot project what they think success looks like. Money is, it's not like we're making or sharing a cornbread recipe here, right? Everybody's like money recipe is different. And so you have to sit there and be willing to go through the iterations with people and make it work because it's not real cookie cutter. And so someone that says, we may not get it right on the first try, but I'm going to keep on going with you, look for something like that. So communication, consistency. I would say the last part is just you want to make sure that you have protection. Like go into products that other people have been in for a long period of time, that there's historical information on, that you can get information readily available and send it to other people so they can do your own analysis for you. That's when you know that you're starting to move into a different type of mindset. When you're at least pacing your financial decisions, you understand that you may not be in a position to act right or act in your best interest. And so you simply want to say, let me look for some information. Let me gather some information and then let me send that to somebody that could help. That's a big difference from just saying, oh, well, you look like you're a professional and you look like you know what you're talking about. And I bet you have my best interest in mind. So I'm just going to believe everything that you say. That type of model, that type of approach hasn't shown to be culturally proficient in the past. And I don't see it changing today. And then unless it changes today, it's not going to change in the future.
I think that's a really good point because especially today, there are so many quote unquote experts out there and they are giving this blanket, you should buy. Everyone go
Mhm.
do X. Everyone, whatever it is, whatever product and service, and I won't necessarily like target one or the other. But I think that type message of everyone is the same and they haven't had a conversation with you and they haven't learned about you or where you're going or what your time horizon is, or what your risk tolerance is, because you might say, I don't feel comfortable losing these last $2. So whatever that is, I think that is key of really having someone that you can trust and that actually takes the time to learn you. Another question, just in terms of relationships. So we know so much of what we learn about money is coming through our family, coming through how we were raised, culturally, what's around us, and so forth. What if we wake up, realize we have a toxic money family or a toxic money circle? So if all your girlfriends are, we need to go shopping, go to brunch, go to happy hour, and there are no positive money conversations happening, how do you either solve that? You can't necessarily fix those people, but how do you kind of be productive in that type of circle?
Yeah, I think in that situation, it's important that your mindset is strong. When we focus on trying to achieve our financial goals or trying to create wealth or trying to envision financial freedom, it is something that's personal. And so we have to take into account what it means to us, what happiness means to us, what the amount of money that we're trying to find, what that dollar amount is. And so a lot of that stuff, we can share it with other people, right? We can bring them in and tell them what we're doing. We can hope for their support, but ultimately it is going to be an individual goal and it's going to be an individual journey. And you're going to have to be mentally strong enough to go through it by yourself. And you're going to have to do that because you can't trust your friends. You can't trust your family to stick with you through your goal because you will have people that want to take you out. You will have people that aren't serious about kind of where they want to go, and therefore they are trying to limit where you want to go. If you are not able to even say, here is what I am doing today, because this is what I know I'm going to be able to do in the future, you can never say no to those types of things. Every single time it's like, oh, okay. All right, yeah, I'll do that. Because you don't have something to say at that moment that's like an effective no, right? Because it's like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't really have an idea of what the future holds. So I'm just going to sit here and like play it by ear. And so, yeah, if you got something good going on right now, okay, I'll jump on that. That's an easy way to say yes every single time to somebody who's whatever. If you have a plan, if you have a goal, if you're trying to move towards actually solving it, that's what comes to mind every single time one of those distractions may come up. And so you're going to need that type of power. And so you can't really change the people that are around you. You can't change the situations that you're in. You can only make your mindset stronger, make your goals more realistic, and just become more focused on doing it, knowing that the majority of people around you are going to try to make it more difficult for you. And therefore, you have to be stronger and more diligent than anybody that you know or have ever known.
So you don't have to drop your family and friends just yet. Not
Yeah,
just
yeah.
you might ultimately decide to when they start to ask to borrow some money. But I guess you don't need to let them go today.
They will. Today.
Now, one thing too, so someone says, all right, I've identified that I have some issues. I think about money in a way that might not be as positive. I can see some trends from whether it be what my parents did, my grandparents did, and so forth. And now I am ready to sit down with someone like you. What are some things
Mhm.
that they should do at home to prepare for that conversation?
Yeah. So first thing is we really do a deep dive into your money history. And so you just start to think about first time interactions with money and really go through everything. When was the first time I learned about money? How did I feel when I first got a job? How did I feel the first time somebody took something from me? uh, because everybody experiences their financial kind of triggers or pivot points at different times. A lot of the work that we do in discovery is trying to figure out, okay, when was that time? Like, how did we reach that moment where we started to associate fear with money or anger with money or happiness with money? There had to be a certain point in your lifetime. And so we're going to spend as much time as we need to try to figure that out, because once we actually get to that origin point, which I'll just call like your superhero origin story, know that for every single superhero, when they find their superpower, they're awkward. Like they don't know how to use it or kind of what's going to be the best purpose for it. And so the second phase is to just go through your awkwardness, right? There is that inflection point in your life that you go through where you're like, okay, this is what happened. This is why it's happening. Somebody has told me why this is happening, and am I going to change or not? And you're probably not going to, right? You have the information, but something's still keeping you from actually changing. That's what we need to fix. That moment and whatever that block is, that's what we need to fix, because it's not just an awareness problem, it's a barrier problem. And so that's where we would have to move to, okay, this is what's keeping us from taking that next step. And so part of it is really just making sure that you're open minded, because we may go down this path and really get to this point that, okay, the awareness isn't the issue, right? You know exactly where it's coming from. You heard everything that I said, but your issue is action, right? We're not actually moving forward. And I think just having an open mind before you go into the process prepares you for something like that. Prepares you to go through this experience to say, hey, we did this deep dive and I'm here to tell you, yeah, it's not something that's with you that's kind of keeping you there, that has this money trauma. It's that you just may be lazy, right? Or that you don't have motivation, or that you don't have a realistic dream. Like sometimes I tell people, hey, this is what you have to do. They say, I want to be a millionaire. Cool. This is what you have to do to be a millionaire. And they're like, well, I don't want to do that. And that's going to take too long. That's the problem, right? That's where we actually have to start to deal with this, because it is not easy. And so really getting your mind into, there's a lot of things that I think are going to be easy, and I think that are going to be simple. And again, they're not going to. I'm going to have to do a deep dive. I'm going to have to understand where it came from. I'm going to have to understand if that's what's causing me trials and tribulations, or if that's what's causing me barriers. And then I'm going to have to actually listen and be able to move forward. And you got to take that all in, because as we're going through it, sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable. Sometimes it feels like, oh, I wasn't quite ready for this. And so I always tell people that you just have to get your mind right, because changing anything is going to be difficult. And you just have to know that the goal is to change. And I'm here to help you change what you came in to change, which was bad money habits.
I love it. And it's definitely, I almost feel like you should have been here chatting with us when we first got started ages ago. Because before, somebody says, how do I save more? What fund should I invest in? Which stock should I purchase? Should I, do flip houses or or be a landlord? Before we jump into all those questions, these are kind of those fundamentals. And I mean, so much about where we are and where we're going and what we're capable to do starts with, where our mind is and are we in the right
Mhm.
mental space to move to that next goal. So if you could see yourself as a millionaire, but you can't see yourself doing the work, there's a block. And so,
Yeah, I would say, I would
huge.
just kind of just add on to that. Like sometimes we don't even realize what it is. Like if you are a business owner but you're a sole proprietor, Like nobody's talking about you when we talk about small businesses, right? Because they're talking about LLCs and S corps and C corps. And so, what's the difference between you being a sole proprietor and setting up an LLC, right? It's the same business that you're doing, but we're just talking about a different entity that recognizes you as a business as opposed to recognizing you as an individual. That's entrepreneurship to some degree, but you have to decide that that's the type of business that you want to be. You have to decide that you want to do things in a certain way so that way you're not just making extra money, but that you're creating equity for yourself. And something as simple as deciding that, oh, I've been a sole proprietor all my life, and now I'm going to switch to an LLC. That's a mindset shift that's going from I'm just making extra money to now I'm building equity for myself. That's a big shift in terms of what the future looks like from that one decision. Right now, it's just not, oh, I'm going to pay more taxes this year. It's I'm building a sustainable business that's paying taxes in my community and building equity. And so that one mindset shift from doing the exact same job is a big difference in how you can create wealth. And it doesn't really take that much to do, right? So that's what I mean by mindset shifts. You have to, if this is what you want to do, it's very simple to tell you how to do it, right? But it's not easy for somebody to go, oh yeah, I'm going to go and file that LLC application, pay that $500 and get it done. That's the difference.
Now, I know we're right up against time. Do you have any closing remarks for the ladies, especially as they're saying, what next? What can they do today? Where can they start? Of course, how do they get prepared to chat with you and make those steps, or even to just identify what are those habits that they've picked up that they might actually want to address?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so get in touch. It's always good to talk to people. Also follow on Twitter because I always try to put tips out there. But it is really just preparing yourself for the mindset and just be willing to do the work. I do free consultations, so do a lot of other financial therapists because it is important that you understand the difference. And so I always recommend having a conversation, right? Just seeing what the difference is, seeing what the different approach is, and how do you want to be different, right? The thing that I would love everybody to just remember the most is the goal is to get you to exactly where you want to be. But if you can't articulate that, right, we're only guessing and we become very ineffective at our jobs. And this is the point, this is the problem with most people in financial services is that a lot of it is based on where do you want to go and kind of where can I put you to get there. And so many people walk in and just say, help me, make me rich, make sure I'm not poor. Like those are not goals that are realistic, objectively speaking, that allow us to actually help you to move forward. And so we can give you financial education, and that part may help out. But there is another part, which is once you have the education, is it changing the way that you talk? Is it changing the way that you communicate and changing the things that you ask for? So let's have that conversation first. Always go through an interview process with a counselor or a therapist, financial psychologist, just so that you're able to get your thoughts out and see if you can communicate. If you can do that, just start as soon as you can. And I would highly recommend that you don't buy anything about budgeting or planning or investing until you get your mindset fixed. I guarantee you, I promise you this, none of those are going to be effective until you get your mindset fixed, right? You can take the classes, you can do the work. We can give you all the examples that we can of people that are making good money and still making bad financial decisions. You really have to focus on the mindset and then use that new attention and awareness to actually provide solutions that give you context. So let's talk, interview whoever you plan on talking to. That's the most important part, communication. Get that whole process taken care of and done, and try to do that before you do anything product related, especially around participating in different investments or other types of vehicles or like other websites that are just doing budgets or whatever the case may be. This isn't a budgeting problem, it's a mindset problem. And the sooner we fix that, the quicker you are to getting towards a solution that you're hopeful for.
I think that's a good point. And you said, make sure I'm not broke, make sure I'm not poor, I think is your statement. But in reality, that's why you're here. Because I'm gonna make sure that you're gonna be rich with knowledge that
Yeah,
you can take on your
it's
journey.
possible.
And if nothing else, you're going to be able to see what is possible. And so these conversations in terms of what is blocking you, why do you keep repeating the same trauma over and over again? Or, so many people kind of stay close to where their family is. And did you buy your first house because someone said you better? Or did you stay on that job because someone said keep that good job? So there's so many things that are limiting your ability. So you see yourself doing something, but there is something there that might stop your ability to actually get to that next step or to get to that bigger goal and that bigger vision. And so I want to thank you so much, Dr. Blount, for being with us today. His contact information is in the description, so definitely reach out to him, get that free consultation. Free stuff. But be sure to join us next week. We got another great Money Monday coming, and we'll have the one next week. We're going to talk a little bit about someone's journey and story. So I always like to share those personal stories about how someone started and how they actually got to their point of financial independence. So I always love showing those stories because one, they look like us and it's possible. So join us next Monday, same time. And until then, figure out what's blocking and reach out to Dr.